Now, time for Hard Talk.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Saka. The Central African Republic is a failed state, long ignored by the outside world. But looking the other way is no longer an option. The lives of hundreds of thousands of civilians are at risk thanks to an internal conflict which has exposed religious division and regional tension. French and African troops are trying to stop the killing, but the Central African Republic's people are paying the price for decades of misrule. My guest is former Prime Minister and opposition leader Martin Ziguélé. Who or what can save his country? Martin Ziguélé in Paris, welcome to Hard Talk.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask you this, as a senior politician in your country, a former Prime Minister, how do you feel when you see many hundreds of thousands of your fellow citizens forced from their homes, you see hundreds killed, and you see your country on the brink of humanitarian catastrophe? What are your feelings?
I am very sad, you know, I am very sad about the situation in my country. It's a situation of chaos. Many people are dying every day. Many people are suffering, women, children, and so on. And the economic of the country has collapsed. And that is all the matters you see when you are in face of a failed state. And I'm very sad. I'm very concerned also. But I do think that we will struggle to build our nation in the few months coming.
Is that the way you see it? Do you really feel that your own country, the Central African Republic, is a failed state?
Yeah, the Central African country is a failed state because, you know, it's not from today. It's 10 or more than 10 years ago. The country was running very, very bad, you know. And what is happening here today is as a result of some bad decisions, bad political decisions. And I do hope that, as I put it before, I think that with the intervention of African forces and both French forces, we can restore peace in the country and rebuild the country on some proper foundations.
You talk of the intervention of outside forces. Of course, there are now, what, 1,600 or so French troops in your country, thousands more regional African forces in your country as well. I remember that back in March of this year, you actually praised President Hollande for not intervening. So how do you feel about the French presence now?
No, the situation is not the same. You know, I think that the first responsible of the situation of our country is former President General Bozizé. When he asked for French intervention last March, it was in order to save his same regime, his same family, his same power. But now, the intervention is not for a regime, not for a leader, not for a ruler. It's to save souls, to save people, to save children, to save wives, to save a country in a whole.
Yeah, but Mr. Ziguélé, I understand your point, but surely the truth is this, that you were so keen to see former President Bozizé overthrown that you told the French not to intervene, and as a result we have seen hundreds, maybe thousands of people die and hundreds of thousands of people forced out of their homes in the fighting that has continued from March until now. Do you not feel a sense of responsibility for that, given that the French could have intervened earlier if you had advised them otherwise?
I would put that very clearly that we have fought as a political opposition party to make negotiation between the last power, the former power of President Bozizé and the coalition of Seleka. We have put all our energy to put out Libreville agreements, you know, last January, to have a political agreement. and the political agreement signed in Libreville allows General Bozizé to remain in power for 3 years, from 2013 to 2016, and he refused to apply the decision made in the agreement. And then in March, when battle was fired again, was put again in the country, he asked for French intervention, not to save a political process, not to save a country. It was only to save his regime. And I repeat that I don't feel guilty because we fight to a political issue of the conflict, but he refused to play the game.
Well, you pile all of the blame on President Bozizé. The truth is that because you were so keen to see him removed from power, you tacitly supported this group, the militia that you call the Seleka, who have proved to be killers. They have proved to be the sorts of people who are prepared to engage in crimes against your people. And I wonder whether you are happy to live with that.
No, I think your presentation of the situation is not the good one. You know that the rebellion was started in December of last year. When the rebellion started at the northern part of our country, my party and the opposition party, they write a letter. They write a letter to the President Deby, who was the leader of the economic community of Central African state, to push on a political issue to the rebellion. And we have been to Libreville only to ask for a political issue to the rebellion. So what is happening is why when we come back in Bangui after this, the agreement, Libreville agreement, Bozizé refused to apply the decision of this agreement. He have chosen to keep on making war with Seleka, and he lost. It's not the responsibility of a political party, of my party, or the political party.
Let
he
me
refused.
Yeah, I don't want to make this too complicated for people around the world who are trying to understand what is happening in Central African Republic. But what we have right now is a President Jotodja who was put in power by the Seleka militiamen. And I want a clear opinion from you on the Seleka. How do you regard these fighters who say they are fighting for a Muslim cause? They seem to be primarily Muslim fighters. Do you regard them as a legitimate force, or do you regard them as hooligans, thugs and murderers, as many in your country seem to regard them?
In all countries in the world, when people take guns and take power, they are not legitimate. So Seleka is not illegitimate. They come in power by force after struggle with the former power in our country. It's why when they took power last March, we pledge for a political agreement. And it's why the CERC and the African Union, they set a meeting in N'Djamena 1, N'Djamena 2, and then after in Brazzaville. They set on a transitional scheme of sharing power between government, national union government, the Seleka as a head of provisional head of state, and a provisional national assembly. It's set up, and we are now in a transitional period, a step to go to elections. And I clearly put out that Seleka is not a legitimate power. They are not legitimate.
But hang on, you just told me that the Seleka should have a role in this transitional government. If they are illegitimate, why should they have a role in this government?
The decision is not made by political parties in the Central African Republic. I am explaining that after the coup of March, there was a meeting in N'Djamena. The meeting was hosted by Chad and managed by the President Deby of Chad, and with the African Union, with Mrs. Zuma, and President Zuma of South Africa was there, and they have decided to keep on the spirit of political agreement of Libreville. And they agree to put on a transitional power with 3 heads, a provisory National Assembly, a head of government of transition, and the country led temporarily by Seleka. If a decision made by head of state is not political parties, it's not my party.
You talk about all these processes, the Libreville meeting, the N'Djamena meeting. You make it sound as though the politicians in Central African Republic have some sort of ability to influence and control events. But of course, that is not true. We see on the ground that the president has no real authority. The people who have authority are the men with guns, and that is the Seleka militia, which, as I say, is primarily Muslim, and increasingly also Christian militias who describe themselves as the anti-Balaka militias. It seems as though your country, in the words of the French foreign minister, is sliding towards genocide. Is that the way you see it? Some sort of religious-based, hate-based internal war? Prime Minister and opposition leader Martin Ziguélé. Who or what can save his country? An option. The lives of hundreds of thousands of civilians are at risk thanks to an internal conflict which has exposed religious division and regional tension. French and African troops are trying to stop the killing, but the Central African Republic's people are paying the price for decades of misrule. My guest is former Martin Ziguélé in Paris. Welcome to Hard Talk.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask you this. As a senior politician in your country, a former prime minister, how do you feel when you see many hundreds of thousands of your fellow citizens?
Now, time for Hard Talk.
Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Saka. The Central African Republic is a failed state, long ignored by the outside world. But looking the other way is no longer forced from their homes. You see hundreds killed, and you see your country on the brink of humanitarian catastrophe. What are your feelings?
I am very sad, you know, I am very sad about the situation in my country. It's a situation